This is a rare Ethiopian Orthodox Bible manuscript, handwritten in Ethiopia's sacred liturgical language, Ge'ez. It's 52 leaves, 102 pages carefully preserved and written by the scribes who devoted their very lives to this work.
Right now, an artificial intelligence trained on ancient Semitic languages is processing a manuscript that Ethiopian monks were explicitly forbidden from translating. For over 1,600 years, this text sat inside a monastery, carved into the side of a cliff in the Tigray highlands, wrapped in goatskin, locked in a stone chamber, guarded by men who took a sacred oath never to render its words into any living language. They could copy it, they could preserve it, they could not explain it. The monastery's own oral tradition held that the text contained the operating instructions for the Ark of the Covenant, not a description, not a legend, not a poem about God's glory. Functional, specific, detailed instructions for what the Ark actually does, how it works, and why every human being who touched it without authorization died instantly. The AI decoded it in 11 days. And what it found doesn't just challenge mainstream archaeology, it obliterates the single most important assumption Western religion has made for 17 centuries, that the Ark of the Covenant was lost. Because according to this manuscript, it was never lost at all. It was hidden deliberately by people who understood exactly what it could do, and they left a manual behind. So the question isn't where is the Ark? The question is, what happens when someone finally follows these instructions? Here's what nobody tells you about where this manuscript was found. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is not a branch of Western Christianity. It is not a derivative. It is not a copy. It is one of the oldest continuous Christian traditions on the face of the earth, predating the Christianization of Rome itself. In the 4th century, during the reign of King Ezana of Aksum, Ethiopia formally adopted Christianity as the state religion. This was around 330 AD, roughly the same period Constantine was consolidating power in Rome. While Rome spent the next several centuries arguing over which books belonged in the Bible, burning the ones that lost the vote, and executing anyone who disagreed, Ethiopia did something different. Ethiopia kept everything. The Ethiopian biblical canon contains up to 88 books. The Protestant Bible has 66 books. The Catholic Bible has 73 books. That is not a rounding error. That is entire theological worlds that the Western Church decided you were not allowed to access. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah, the Kebra Nagast, the Book of the Covenant, complete texts preserved in Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language that became the sacred literary language of Ethiopian Christianity before Latin or Greek dominated the faith anywhere else. And get this, the survival of these texts is not an accident. It is a direct consequence of geography and war. When Islamic expansion swept across North Africa in the 7th century, Ethiopia became a Christian island, cut off from Constantinople, cut off from Rome, cut off from every ecclesiastical council that spent centuries deciding which scriptures to approve and which to destroy. The deserts and hostile territories surrounding the Ethiopian highlands created a theological time capsule. No book burnings reached those mountains. No papal decrees penetrated those cliffs. No inquisitor ever climbed the rope ladders to the monastery doors. High in the Tigray region, in places like Debre Damo and Abuna Yamata Gu, monks carved churches and scriptoriums directly into vertical sandstone cliff faces, accessible only by rope or by bare hands gripping narrow rock ledges hundreds of feet above the valley floor. Inside those rooms, by the light of oil lamps, generation after generation of monks mixed ink from crushed minerals and plant resins, stretched and scraped animal skins into parchment, and copied manuscripts with reed pens, shaping every character of the angular Ge'ez script with a precision that took years to master. The work destroyed their eyesight, it bent their spines, it cramped their hands into permanent curls around the pens they held for decades. They did it anyway, because they believed every word they were copying was the direct revelation of God. Not forbidden knowledge, not dangerous heresy, the truth. exactly as it had always been. Stay with me here, because the proof of what they preserved is staggering. The Garima Gospels, housed at the Abba Garima Monastery near Adwa, were radiocarbon dated by a team at Oxford University to between 330 and 660 AD. That makes them among the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts known to survive anywhere on Earth. Full-color illuminations of Christ and the evangelists, painted on goatskin parchment, sealed inside a mountain for over 1,500 years, completely unknown to the Western academic world until the 21st century. Jacques Mercier, the French art historian who helped bring international attention to these manuscripts, described seeing them for the first time as encountering something he had been told could not exist. But the Garima Gospels are famous now. What has not received the same attention is a separate collection of manuscripts found in the same network of Tigray cliff monasteries, texts that the monks themselves categorized differently, not as scripture to be read aloud in liturgy, not as gospels to be illuminated and displayed. These were sealed texts, restricted manuscripts. Writings that the monastic tradition held were too powerful, too specific, too operationally detailed to be translated into any language the outside world could read. The monks could copy the Gia's characters faithfully from one parchment to the next, but the oral tradition passed from preserve them, and wait. One of those manuscripts describes the Ark of the Covenant with a level of technical specificity that has no parallel in any Western biblical text. And for 16 centuries, its contents remained locked inside a language that fewer than a handful of living scholars could fully parse, until an AI trained on Gaia's linguistic patterns processed the entire text in less than 2 weeks. What it decoded is about to change everything you think you know about the most powerful object described in the Bible. But first, you need to understand how the machine actually did it. The Hill Museum and Manuscript Library in Collegeville, Minnesota, has spent decades doing something most people have never heard of. Working with Ethiopian monasteries, university teams, and international preservation organizations, HMML has been systematically photographing, cataloging, and digitizing tens of thousands of ancient manuscripts in Ge'ez and Amharic. High-resolution imaging, multispectral photography that reveals text invisible to the naked eye, erased layers, overwritten passages, ink that faded centuries ago but still left chemical traces in the parchment fibers. Dr. Getachew Haile, who spent a career at HMML cataloging Ge'ez manuscripts, said repeatedly that the hardest part of his work was not the preservation itself. It was convincing Western scholars that what they were looking at were not regional curiosities or minor footnotes to Christian history. These were foundational documents, primary sources, texts that predated or paralleled the very scriptures the Western Church treated as definitive, and in some cases contained material far more detailed than anything that survived in Greek or Latin transmission. He was right, and modern technology is now proving it at a scale he could not have imagined. Here's the thing, Ge'ez is not a dead language in the way Latin is dead. It survives as the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Priests still chanted it, but its older literary forms, particularly the archaic registers used in pre-medieval manuscripts, contain grammatical structures, vocabulary, and semantic patterns that even fluent Ge'ez readers struggle to fully decode. Some passages use terminology that appears nowhere else in the surviving Ge'ez corpus, words that seem to have been coined specifically to describe concepts that had no equivalent in ordinary language. Technical terms, operational terms, language that reads less like theology and more like engineering. This is where artificial intelligence entered the picture. Machine learning models trained on large corpora of Semitic languages, including Ge'ez, Amharic, Tigrina, Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic, began identifying linguistic patterns across these related language families that human scholars working within a single tradition had missed. The AI could cross-reference root structures, identify cognates across multiple Semitic branches, and reconstruct probable semantic ranges for words that has stumped translators for generations. Now, here's what nobody tells you. When the AI processed the restricted manuscript from the Tigray collection, It didn't just translate the text word by word. It identified structural patterns in the language that indicated the original author was describing physical processes, cause and effect sequences, conditional instructions, if-then constructions that mirror technical documentation more than they mirror prayer or prophecy. The decoded passages describe the Ark of the Covenant, but not the Ark you learned about in Sunday school, not the gold-covered box that Indiana Jones chased across a movie screen, something far older in conception, far more specific in detail, and far more terrifying in implication. And the manuscript doesn't start with what the Ark looks like. It starts with what happens to the air around it when it is active. If this is the kind of hidden history that keeps you up at night, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what's coming next is going to rewrite everything you thought you knew. The Western Bible describes the Ark of the Covenant in the book of Exodus. God gives Moses precise measurements, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high, acacia wood overlaid with pure gold, inside and out, a mercy seat of solid gold on top, 2 golden cherubim with outstretched wings facing each other. Inside, the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. Later traditions add Aaron's rod and a jar of manna. That is the standard account. Measurements, materials, contents. But here's where it gets wild. The decoded Ethiopian manuscript does not begin with measurements. It begins with warnings. Detailed, specific, graduated warnings about what happens to a human body that approaches the Ark under the wrong conditions. Well, we can do. The text describes what the AI linguists have tentatively rendered as a field, a zone of influence that extends outward from the Ark when the presence of God inhabits it. This field is not metaphorical. The manuscript describes its effects on physical matter with a precision that is jarring in a document this old. The air becomes heavy. Sound distorts. Light bends around the object in a way the text describes as the folding of radiance, as if illumination itself curves toward the Ark and cannot escape. Within this field, living tissue reacts. The text describes the skin of unworthy individuals developing lesions, hair falling out, eyes clouding, blood issuing from the nose and mouth. And if the individual does not withdraw, death, sudden, total, without wound or weapon. Stop and think about what that means. Now compare it to Western biblical accounts. 2 Samuel chapter 6. A man named Uzzah reaches out his hand to steady the Ark when the oxen pulling its cart stumble. The moment he touches it, God strikes him dead on the spot. No explanation, no mechanism, just instant divine wrath. The passage has puzzled Western theologians for centuries. It seems disproportionate. It seems arbitrary. It seems cruel. The Ethiopian manuscript says it wasn't arbitrary at all. It was physics, or something so close to physics that the distinction becomes meaningless at that scale. The text goes further. It describes what happens when the Ark is carried into battle, and the parallels to the Western Bible are unmistakable but vastly expanded. In the book of Joshua, the Israelites march around the walls of Jericho for 7 days carrying the Ark. On the 7th day, they circle 7 times. The priests blow ram's horn trumpets, the people shout, and the walls collapse. The Western text gives no mechanism. It's presented as pure miracle. The Ethiopian manuscript describes the same event, but it includes details the Western version strips away. The Ark, when carried by a consecrated priest walking in a specific geometric pattern, generates what the text calls the voice of the presence. Not the voice of the priests, not the sound of the horns, a sound that emanates from the Ark itself, below the range of human hearing, felt in the chest and bones rather than heard by the ears. The manuscript says this sound, when amplified by the pattern of movement and the blowing of the trumpets at precise intervals, builds in intensity until physical strictures cannot maintain their cohesion. The walls of Jericho didn't fall because of a shout. According to this manuscript, they fell because the Ark generated a resonance that unmade them at the structural level. Stone liquefied, mortar turned to powder. The walls didn't topple, they disintegrated. And get this, The manuscript describes the Ark's power not as supernatural in the way Western theology uses that word. It describes it as the raw, unfiltered presence of the Creator interacting with physical matter. The text says that all physical reality is sustained by the Word of God, the vibration, the frequency through which matter holds its form. The Ark doesn't channel some separate mystical energy. It opens a direct conduit to the foundational frequency of existence itself. Everything near it either harmonizes with that frequency or is destroyed by it. There is no middle ground. This is why specific rituals were required. This is why specific bloodlines were designated to carry it. This is why the high priest entered the Holy of Holies only once a year on Yom Kippur, wearing specific garments, burning specific incense, following a specific sequence of actions that the manuscript describes as tuning, bringing the human body into sufficient alignment with the Ark's field to survive proximity to it. The text uses a Giaz phrase that the AI translated as the garment of resonance, referring to the priestly vestments, not decorative robes, not symbolic clothing. A functional interface between a human body and an energy source powerful enough to disintegrate anyone who approached it unprepared. The bells on the hem of the high priest's robe, described in Exodus 28, aren't ornamental in this reading. They're acoustic instruments, generating specific tones that interact with the field surrounding the Ark, signaling the priest's living presence to the presence within. Now here's what nobody tells you. The manuscript connects all of this directly to the Kebra Nagast, the Ethiopian national epic. The Kebra Nagast, compiled in its current form in the 14th century, but drawing on traditions far older, tells the story of Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen Sheba. According to the text, Menelik visited his father in Jerusalem, and when he departed, the Ark of the Covenant went with him, carried secretly to Ethiopia, where it has remained ever since. Western scholars have dismissed this as legend for centuries, national mythology, a convenient origin story for a Christian kingdom that wanted to claim Solomonic legitimacy. But the Decoded manuscript doesn't read like legend. It reads like a transfer protocol. It describes the specific conditions under which the Ark was moved, the priestly lineage that accompanied it, the rituals performed at each stage of the journey, the construction of a specific chamber in Axum, designed to contain the Ark's field and prevent it from affecting the surrounding population. It describes this chamber with architectural specificity, the materials used for the walls, the dimensions, the ventilation system designed to channel the atmospheric effects of the Ark's presence away from living quarters. Stay with me here, because this is where the ancient text collides with something that exists in the physical world right now. In the city of Asum, in northern Ethiopia, stands a small, unremarkable chapel called the Chapel of the Tablet. It sits within the compound of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, and according to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, inside that chapel, right now, today, sits the Ark of the Covenant. One monk guards it. He is appointed for life. He is the only human being permitted to enter the chapel and see the Ark. He never leaves the compound. When he dies, another monk is appointed. No government official has ever been granted access. No archaeologist, no foreign dignitary, no pope, no patriarch, no president. The guardian of the Ark lives and dies within those walls, and whatever he sees inside, he takes to his grave. Western media has treated this as charming folklore, a quaint Ethiopian tradition, a national legend given physical form by a locked building and a devoted monk. Nothing to take seriously. But here's the thing. The Decoded manuscript describes precisely this arrangement, not as tradition, not as custom, as necessity. The text says the Ark requires a permanent human custodian whose body has been prepared through decades of specific ritual practice to withstand continuous proximity to the object. The guardian doesn't just watch over the Ark. According to the manuscript, he serves as a biological buffer, a living resonance point between the Ark's field and the outside world. Without the guardian, the text warns, the field expands. With the guardian performing the prescribed daily rituals, a field is contained. The manuscript describes what happens if the containment fails, and the language the AI decoded is not vague. The ground shakes, water sources within a specific radius become undrinkable, animals flee, plants wither in a circular pattern radiating outward from the Ark's location. People within the inner radius develop what the text describes as the burning sickness, symptoms that line up with what modern medicine would recognize as acute radiation syndrome. And this is precisely why the manuscript was never supposed to be translated. This is why the monks who copied it for 16 centuries were told to preserve the characters but never explain the words. Because if the Ark functions as this text describes, then it is not a religious relic. It is not a symbolic object. It is not a metaphor for God's covenant with Israel. It is the single most powerful device described in any ancient text. And someone in Aksum is sitting next to it right now. In 363 AD, the Council of Laodicea issued its canonical list, determining which books belonged in the Christian Bible and which did not. The Book of Enoch, rejected. The Book of Jubilees, rejected. The Ascension of Isaiah, rejected. Numerous Ethiopian and Jewish texts that early Christians had read, quoted, and treated as sacred for centuries, removed, suppressed, in many cases physically destroyed. The official justification was theological consistency. These texts were labeled apocryphal, unreliable, uninspired, too complex for ordinary believers, too dangerous for unsupervised interpretation. But the Decoded manuscript suggests a different reason entirely. If the Ark of the Covenant is real, if it functions as described, if it sits right now in a chapel in Aksum, then every power structure built on the assumption that God's direct physical presence left the earth is built on a lie. The entire architecture of medieval Western Christianity depended on one premise. God is distant. God is accessed through the church. Salvation requires priests, sacraments, approved rituals, institutional mediation. Without that premise, there are no tithes, no indulgences, no fees for baptism, marriage, or burial, no papal authority, no ecclesiastical courts, no inquisitions, no empire. But if a physical object exists that serves as a direct conduit to the divine presence, an object so powerful it kills anyone who approaches it unworthily, an object that doesn't require Rome's permission to function, then the entire system collapses. The church doesn't control access to God. A group of Ethiopian monks does. And they've been controlling it since the time of Solomon, 1,000 years before Christ, 2,000 years before the medieval papacy claimed authority over all Christian souls. That's not a theological problem, that's an existential threat to the most powerful institution in the history of Western civilization. So they buried the evidence. They excluded the Ethiopian texts from the canon. They dismissed the Kibber Nagast as mythology. They treated the Aksum claim as folklore. And they made sure the one manuscript that contained the detailed operational description of the Ark remained locked inside a language that almost no one in the Western world could read. For 16 centuries, it worked. Then, a machine learned to read Ge'ez. Here's where the ancient and the modern converge in a way that cannot be dismissed. The Decoded manuscript describes the Ark's power as the raw frequency of creation itself, the vibration through which all matter holds its form. Everything that exists, the text says, is sustained by the Word of God, not as metaphor, but as literal vibrational energy. The Ark doesn't generate this energy. It reveals it. It opens a point in physical space where the foundational frequency of reality is exposed, unfiltered, unmediated, overwhelming to anything not calibrated to receive it. A concept written on goatskin parchment by monks in a cliff-face monastery more than a millennium ago. And it sounds strikingly, uncomfortably close to what modern quantum physics describes when it talks about the quantum field, the underlying energetic substrate from which all particles, all forces, all matter emerge. The idea that solid matter is not truly solid at all, but patterns of energy held in specific vibrational states. That reality itself is, at its most fundamental level, frequency. Nikola Tesla said it a century ago. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Ethiopian monks wrote it down 1,000 years before Tesla was born. And the manuscript they preserved doesn't just describe the concept in abstract terms. It describes a physical object that interacts with it directly. The implications are staggering. If the Ark functions as the manuscript describes, It is not merely a religious artifact. It is a record of ancient knowledge about the fundamental nature of reality, knowledge that was understood, applied, and then deliberately hidden from the vast majority of humanity. Dr. Getachew Haile spent his career trying to tell Western academia that Ethiopian manuscripts were not peripheral documents. They were primary sources, foundational texts, records of knowledge that the Western tradition had simply chosen to forget. Modern digitization projects are proving him right. The AI that decoded this manuscript is just the beginning. There are thousands of Ge'ez texts that have never been fully translated, thousands more that have never been photographed. Manuscripts sitting in cliff-face monasteries right now, wrapped in goat skin, sealed in stone chambers, guarded by monks who were told to wait. The monks waited 16 centuries. The machine arrived in 11 days. And this is just one manuscript. If one restricted Ge'ez text contains a detailed operational description of the most powerful object in the Bible, if it took artificial intelligence less than 2 weeks to decode what human institutions spent 17 centuries burying, then the question that should keep every historian, every theologian, every physicist, and every honest person awake tonight is not whether the Ark is real. The question is, what else is sitting in those cliff-face monasteries, wrapped in goatskin, waiting for a machine that can finally read it? The monks did their part. Generation after generation, century after century, bent backs and ruined eyesight and cramped hands, shaping Ge'ez characters by lamplight, preserving what they were told was too powerful to explain, trusting that one day the world would be ready. The AI doesn't care about councils or canons or institutional power. It reads the language, it identifies the patterns, it outputs the translation. No politics, no theology, no fear. For 17 centuries, the most powerful institution in the Western world made sure you never saw these texts. And a machine built in the 21st century just opened a door. What's behind the next one? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you want to be here when the next forbidden manuscript is decoded, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the Ark of the Covenant manuscript was just the first seal to break. There are monasteries in those mountains that haven't been opened in 1,000 years, and we are just getting started.